How do you know that, Denise? How do you know that? Uh, Good morning. Good morning, Miami and everybody else abroad. Russell, good to see you, man. I hope you travel safely. Terry, I probably wouldn't be here if it wasn't for Terry and all the minions that this group has chasing down speakers and stuff like that. I got 4 messages yesterday reminding me about this talk today. So you got a lot of service workers out there you might not even know about. And it's probably not necessarily in service to you. It might be in service to me because I'm notorious for miscalculating, misscheduling, and that kind of stuff. But really, really happy I made it here this morning. What you did today was you saved me from some Brazilian jiu-jitsu, rear naked chokes, and monster trucks of my 4-year-old grandson, who's actually spending the weekend with me. He's just been beating the living shit out of me since 6:30 this morning. And I got to tell you, I said, hey, man, come on and jump in the shower with me. I got some stuff to do. And he was filthy. Like, I mean, without, cookies. And I mean, I'm his grandpa, right? So he's having, like, Pringles for breakfast and some cookies and all that kind of stuff. And he's filthy. And so he got saved from me, and I got saved from him. So here we are together. I'm really, really happy to be here. I asked Denise at the beginning, before there was only 3 or 4 people here, and I said, just let me know if there's new people in the room, because something tends to happen to me when I get the opportunity to speak early morning, and especially on a Sunday morning. I don't know why that day seems to be a little bit special for me, but I really think what I'm going to talk about today is I'm going to talk about power, and I'm going to run it through my story. When you have the opportunity to do this a lot, you don't just get tired of telling your own story. You sort of, because we're told that we're supposed to talk about what it was like, what happened, and what we're like today. And I'm going to talk about that in relation to the power. In a week and a half of nonstop Alcoholics Anonymous talks, and my commentary is always the same. If nothing else, when you shut the Zoom call off, if you don't hear anything that resonated, if you don't feel or experience anything in this next hour, I just ask that you consider about how much I'm going to express that I love Alcoholics Anonymous. If you turn your computer off and say, man, this guy really loves AA. He can't speak worth a shit, and he's got a big mouth and he's arrogant, but man, he loves AA. If that's your experience, then that's what I'm trying to send out there. Most of the people that I know that do this and do this effectively and do this a lot are people who would actually really love Alcoholics Anonymous. And I may touch on why that is, but I want you to actually feel that it is, period. So, Miami, thanks for having me. Where do we go? I think I wonder sometimes if the Sunday isn't still reflective of it's always been this sort of a different day for me in the week. I'm always conscious of it being Sunday. And it's probably because I was baptized and born and raised in a Catholic upbringing. And Sundays, there was all kinds of sort of written rules on the way that a family or people should exist. And they were very pronounced very loudly in the home I was in, but they were just never adhered to by anybody there. And, it's kind of like the sense of what I got. My alcoholism and the way I drank was I had this incredible childhood where I had a family that fought and then they made up. And then they fought again, and there were police, there were beatings, there were broken bones, there was blood, and there was hockey, and there was fishing, and there was friends, and there was school that I loved being at school. I loved learning. I had this incredible, in my estimation, this incredible childhood, and I had no idea how broken I was, how smashed up I was until I was fixed. I had no idea. I went through that childhood, and I spent some time with Sandy, and Sandy told me one time, he says, the older I get, the better my childhood is. And now I know what he's talking about. Now I know what he meant by that. The older I get, the better my childhood was. And so at 12 years old, I'd take my first drink. I have a couple bottles of beer in the basement of my parents' home. I had sips and all that kind of stuff growing up in this alcoholic family where it was around me all the time. But this was my time. I had a couple bottles of beer, and my world changed. And it didn't change because I became a better dancer or a bigger man or better. I was 12 years old. It changed because I was okay. And I just felt like I believed everybody else around me felt. At 12 years old, I had always felt like different. And now I felt that now I know what you guys feel like all the time. So I pursued that like an animal. I pursued that like crazy. But that was it. I had this revelation when I had those couple bottles of beer. And it was that I could be and feel a certain way. And I got to tell you, it's the first time I ever felt like, my insides matched my outsides. It was the first time I ever felt that way. And so growing up, though, like here's the sort of walking into this world, walking into this life. I had a mother who was a churchgoer every Sunday, and I had a father who was anti-Catholicism and verbally anti-Catholicism, but put us in Catholic schools, and every Sunday we'd be getting all dressed up with a tie and a shirt and the little suits and all that. From the time I remember growing up, and I was probably 8 or 9, 10 years old or something like that, and my father was sitting up. He was having a Bloody Mary. He was sitting on a Sunday morning at the table, and we were all getting ready to go, and I said, "Dad, how come you don't go to church?" He says, "I don't have to. I don't want to. I don't have to." I said, "Well, I don't want to." And he says, "Well, you don't have to then." And my mother lost it. She lost it. And off came the suit and off came the tie. And that was the last time that I went to church in any formal way. I want to talk about what it was like to be in this sort of spiritual genre. And the thing about being Irish Catholic is we love funerals and we love weddings. That's why we do both so often and make a big deal out of both. And that's where we see all our family, and it's so funerals are always family reunions, So I was dragged along to a lot of those when I was a kid. But I have this stark recollection when I was 7 years old. There was a girl in my class named Michelle. And Michelle had 9 brothers and sisters, and of course 2 parents. And we got news as little kids, and some of you will remember when you were in grade school and that kind of stuff, when you got news like this. We got news that her entire family had been burnt in a fire. All of them. She had slept over at a friend's house, and she was the only one that wasn't killed. And our school was right adjacent to the church. And as classmates of this young girl, we marched across the parking lot and into the church. And I was at the front of the lead. I was in one of the first kids through the door. And there were all the caskets. There were 10 caskets lined up, varying in sizes, at the front of the room. And it hit me in the head like a sledgehammer. And I swear I didn't have the sort of intellect to sort of what kind of God. But I remember looking up at this massive crucifix in this church and saying, "What is this?" And my doubt that I had maybe had or didn't have became apparent to me. My doubt became apparent to me. And I got to tell you, I didn't start looking for all the beauty and the joy in the world at 7 or 8 years old. I started looking at all the ways in which this God was smiting us. And I saw it. This world provides lots of evidence that there's a vengeful, angry God that's pissed off at human beings. And if you spend your time looking for that stuff, you'll see enough evidence that that is indeed the case. And so I had this departure from this spirit, this departure from this power. I remember after my first confession, I remember being in line to go into the confessional. I was a pretty good kid, and I'm in line and I'm thinking, what am I going to say? So I went in and I made a whole bunch of shit up. I made a whole bunch of stuff up to the priest, so I could get some penance and all that kind of stuff. It was a bizarre sort of system that I was being raised in, and there was no spirituality attached to my life in any way, shape, or form. There was religiosity and zero spirituality, and I actually knew that at a young age. I actually knew that. Now, I want to fast forward. Drinking didn't do me any good. I took those couple bottles of beer, and within a couple of hours, my life changed, and then I started pursuing alcohol with a vengeance. And as a kid, I'm getting it as often as possible. I was drinking at school on a regular basis at 14 and 15 years old. I was the last time I was allowed in my parents' home was when I was 15 years old. At 17 years old, I'm in prison. And this is where I met you guys. Now, here's the interesting thing about my drinking is that I never got I would go and drink, and with buddies or in the bush or in a bar or whatever it was, I would go and drink. And my aim was never to come out of a blackout 2, 3, or 4 days later in handcuffs or with a car racked up or somebody else's car usually. And that was never my intention. It just seemed to always be the case. And so at 17 years old, I'm in custody, and I don't know why I'm there. And I tell this story because if you'd asked me to come down to Miami to do this live, I would have walked down there. I would have done it. I'd do anything for AA because you guys, I didn't come to the doors of AA. That was not my experience. You guys kept coming to me. So this old guy comes in, and Copper said, he's a big man around town, cause be good to him. And I'm already a bit of a not right in the head sort of kid. They put me in the center room, and this old guy comes in. I swear to God, he's 105. This guy's 105 years old, to 105 easy. He comes in, he's got this flat gray crew cut. He's got these icy blue eyes. He's got these gray things that, and his eyebrows are longer than they're supposed to. They move when they're not supposed to. He's got these yellow teeth, big face, flaring nostrils, and he says, "Hi, I'm Bob." And I said, "Oh, hello, Bob." And he sits down and he starts telling me his story. Like all 112 years of it. I'm telling you, every single solitary moment. And he's going on. And I'm 17. I don't give a shit. I don't care. I don't even, why? What are you telling me this? And he's crying. And he says, and I had my son on my lap, and I was going to drive my rig into the wall. And I reached over and I patted him and said, "Hey, man, it's going to be okay, dude. It's going to be okay. You got to let it go. You got to let it go, And then he's telling me, he's laughing, he's crying, and I'm not digging what's going on here, but he didn't ask me my name, he didn't ask me if I drank, he didn't ask me what I was in prison for, he was just going on and on and on. Now, he gets up after an hour, he goes, "Thanks for listening," puts on his satin jacket, and walks out the door. And I said to the cops, I said, "What the hell was that?" He said, "Well, those were the A&As. I said, "Don't let those freaks in here again." Now, I got to tell you, I haven't identified a drinking problem yet. There was no identification with this guy. I had no idea what was going on here. It was bizarre, right? Now, you fast forward a number of years. I go to one of the biggest meetings in the city, and over in the corner is this old guy. Now he's 112 and 115, and he's old. He's making the shittiest cup of coffee in the history in North America. Brutal. He's been doing it for years. And I go up behind the guy, and I said, "Hey, Bob, how are you?" And he turns around and says, "Hi, son." And I said, "Bob, do you remember me a few years back?" And told him, he said, "No, I don't." I gave him a few more details. He says, "Oh, yeah, I remember you." And I said, "Why me? Why me?" He said, "Well, it wasn't about you, man." He said, "I was having a bad day. I went to the jail." I said, "Yeah, you got a piss tank here, you got a drunk here I can talk to," and they gave me you. That's it. I said, "Pardon?" And if I've done nothing else this morning, I've just blown up the altruism of Alcoholics Anonymous. It's what we do. He wasn't there for me. He was there for him. And he just came, told his story, got up and walked out. He didn't even get, and that sounds like who? That sounds like Bill. I'm not going to believe, you guys know the story. You guys, I asked if there was any new people here because I wanted to talk about God this morning. And when Bill went into Bob, he sat down and Bob told him, he said, "Get rid of this bum. Stick your head in the door. Give him 15 minutes. Get rid of him." And Bill told his story. And he went there to put his jacket on. Bob said, "Whoa. I listened to you. Now you listen to me." And Bill sat back down and Bob told his story. That's how Alcoholics Anonymous did this. It wasn't one alcoholic. See, Bill had done that. He had done that for 6 months. He'd been telling alcoholics, and he'd done it. But it was when one alcoholic shared with another alcoholic. When the other alcoholic, Bob had never told his story to anybody. He told it to Bill. And that day, something was struck. Now, the interesting thing about this is that I didn't recognize my need for Alcoholics Anonymous, but I knew something profound had taken place. Now, I carried on in my life, and the way it just goes that way. I'm making a lot of secular and self-based decisions, and so I end up in a federal penitentiary because most of those decisions weren't very good, as you can imagine. And now I'm doing time, and I see a lot of do-gooders. I see a lot of religiosity. I see a lot of people. We got native communities in the prison, and they got so there's full gospel people coming in, and they always put on the best barbecues in prison, and they bring the best, So I'm around that stuff. I'm watching as that stuff is happening. But I know that this God thing is a hook, line, and sinker thing. I know you're a sucker. You're just a sucker. And I know that. And so I'm very, very detached from it. And I read, and I spend my time in custody that way as I'm reading a lot, and I'm reading everything opposite to what would lend towards spirituality. If there's something that's arguing any sort of religiosity, I'm reading that. And that's how I'm existing. That's how I'm existing in my sane and sober moments. And so what happens is that I just develop this sort of this self-will, this self-concept, this self-mind. Now, without going through the whole thing, and some of you have heard my story before, and if you haven't, please, anytime we'll talk, anytime. I'm easy to reach. I end up on this sort of, in this position where my prison sentence is reduced and I come out and I'm back in the community. And I'm 23 years old, and my life has been nothing but violence and crime and the ramifications of those criminal endeavors. That's what my life has been up to that point. On July the 16th, 1987, having had my parole suspended and going back to prison, I was in a jail cell one day. And in that jail cell, I began to think about what had gone on in my life. I was by myself. There was this thing going to happen inside. I was going to explode. And I know the exact moment. I know the exact day that this happened. I asked to get into my cell, and while there, I began to think about stuff. And I looked at these guys who came to let me out, walking across the parking lot, and I lost my mind. I remember this as vivid as it happened yesterday. And I started to flip out, and I was screaming and crying and frothing at the mouth, and I was pounding on the desk, and I couldn't pound on the desk anymore. I was pounding on the stool, and when I couldn't do that anymore, I was on the floor and screaming and crying and pounding on the concrete floor, and I said, I don't want to live like this. I don't want to live like this anymore. I said those words aloud as I could push out my chest, and in almost an instant, I heard a voice say, you don't have to. You don't have to live like this anymore. And that was July the 16th, 1987. In that moment, something happened around me and inside of me that I had never experienced before. When I say that light, Bill Wilson talked about a light. He was talking about actual light coming into the room. What happened inside of me was I became light. Everything, all the heaviness that I had felt in my whole life that I had trudged around with, you know that heaviness I'm talking about, that armor of heaviness, whether it was guilt or resentment or shame or remorse or fear or just such a loser, all that stuff was on me. Poof, it was gone. Now, when I tell that story, it doesn't matter how big the group is, there's always somebody there that can identify with that. Somebody else heard the voice. Marty Mann heard the voice. Bill Wilson heard the voice. These are the things that happened to me. And so I screamed that out, and that was the answer. You don't have to live like this anymore. That was July the 16th, 87. I got out of custody again, and I came back on the street and came back to Alcoholics Anonymous with an absolute, I want to say a vengeance, but you know what? There was no, thanks, Mike. Thanks for chiming in there. I appreciate that. So I came back to Alcoholics Anonymous with this sort of earnestness. But it wasn't like I don't want to say a vengeance or a hunger or anything like that. It was like this, I got nothing else. And if you knew me, you'd know. I went down and I joined a group, and I'd set up the meeting at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and they gave me the keys right away. I'd set up the meeting at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, shoot a ball around in the basement with a hockey stick, and wait until people started showing up at 8 o'clock at night. I put on 100 cups of coffee and set up 50 chairs, and nobody would come. And over a couple of 18 months that happened. That went on for 18 months, and I just kept showing up and doing it. And in the meantime, I was going around to all these other meetings that actually had people at it. But while I was sitting there by myself in this hall, I read all of your literature, the literature that you had in your pamphlets. I started reading that stuff, and I would fall asleep and get up, and I'd take down the meeting, take down the coffee, and while I was in the basement of that church, I just began communicating. It wasn't like I just remembered the voice and started talking to the voice. And I remember that there was something happening inside of me, and there were magnificent things that happened over those years inside in that experience that I had. But what had started to happen is that very, very unprovoked by me, my mind was open. My mind was open to this power, to this spirit. I'd never rejected it, but I still had no concept of how it works. Now, this is for the new people. I was in Alcoholics Anonymous for 14 years before I had an AA experience. And what I mean by that is I had a profound spiritual experience in that jail cell on July the 16th, 87. And I was freed wholly from the desire and the obsession to drink. And it's never returned. Never returned. And from that moment, for the next 14 years, I hit AA meetings like I loved it. I loved AA. So I'm going to all of these meetings, and within a short period of time, I'm sponsoring guys, I'm talking to people, and I was 215 pounds of jailhouse muscle and a lot of anger and rage, and so what people would do is they'd ask me to move, and do you understand what I mean by move? Alcoholics and Alcoholics Anonymous move a lot. So they move, like locations, apartments, houses. And if you got a few drug addicts that snuck in there, usually they're moving other people's stuff. But what we were doing was, all through my early years of sobriety, was I was not drinking and moving people. And I thought that was AA. I really did. I was in service. There wouldn't be a name for it. And it wouldn't be talked about in our literature if there wasn't such a thing. And it was called, it's called two-stepping. Don't drink and help people. And that's just 14 years. 5 years of doing that, I got a car. It was a 1978 Monte Carlo, and it had the same license plate on the front as on the back. I'm not kidding. Dead serious. It was a miracle. My life was changing. My family in this small town just a little bit over from us, they were calling and my mom, AA is miraculous. They've done for my son what no love or anybody else could ever do. You guys have accomplished something great in her eyes. And I'm trudging through this world, through this life, with my AA as a priority. And that is, don't drink and go to meetings, do anything that you're asked to do, and in the meantime, try to get a life. And so I go back to school, I become educated, I get a career, I'm involved with, women, plural, there's nefarious activities going on in my life. I thought that you could steal a little bit. I thought that it was okay to, if you didn't get caught, the real defect of character and shortcoming wasn't the things that I was doing. It was getting caught doing the things I was doing. And there was no essence of the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. This is just a place I was coming up in, guys. It's not anybody's fault. I don't put it on anybody. There was no big books around. We were doing a 12 and 12 thing. And I'd sit around, my home group was a 12 and 12 meeting. I'd sit around, read the 12 and 12, and I would identify with some of the shit they were talking about in the steps. And I would think to myself, well, therefore I must have taken that step. And it wasn't like it was a work to do anyway. I wasn't denying it. It wasn't in front of me. It wasn't a part of what we did. Don't drink and go to meetings was the message. And you'll hear people been around since mid-'80s and forward. That was the message. And there's nothing else you can do about it. And some of us actually managed not to drink. At 9 years sober, I had a little girl. 9 years sober, I had this beautiful little girl. And I remember this as distinctly. Now, 19 years old, I'm diagnosed as sociopathic. I'm not able to formulate relationships with any other human being. I have no regard or morality around in the context of anybody else's safety. So I don't play nice with others. I spent a lot of my time in the hole, most of my adolescence and young adulthood in prison. And now here I am, sitting here, and I'm in this world, and I got this little baby in front of me. And I'm looking at her, and she's looking at me. And I mean looking. And it's just her and I. My little basement apartment, and something happened. For the first time in my life, I had felt love. In fact, my anniversary just the other day, 2 people gave me the Velveteen Rabbit as a gift. And I don't know if anybody here has ever read the Velveteen Rabbit. She looked at me, and I looked at her, and for the first time in my life, I felt love for another human being or anything. But that wasn't as magnificent as the love I felt coming from her. And something inside of me changed that day, and I knew that Alcoholics Anonymous was not about not drinking. I knew it was all about love. It was all about love. And if you listen to my old talks, my old CDs, my old tapes, you'll hear it. Love, 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 love. I was speaking at Al-Anon all the time because they really, I had this childhood growing up of anger, rage, no love. And now I have this this thing that's all about love. Hey, it's all about love, man. And that's what it's all about. And that's what I'm talking about when I'm asked to speak, right? And that goes on for a couple of years. I'm giving hugs, not drugs. I'm giving Bed Bath & Beyond bags of gifts at anniversaries. It's love. It's all about the love. And then one day I meet these guys. They're talking about God, and they're not talking about like a idol. They're talking about capital G God. They're talking about God. And I remember seeing the steps on the wall, and the word God was embossed. And I remember thinking, I'm going to have difficulty with them steps. But these guys were talking about a relationship with this God, and it was freaking me out a little bit. And I started to realize, oh my God. God, this is not about love. This is all about God. This is all about God. And so you hear my talks back then when I'm 10 or 11 years sober. It's God, 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 God. And we're running around. We're running through the woods naked. Yeah. We're just screaming for primal screaming and getting in touch with our manhood. And we're doing native retreats and sweats and all that kind of stuff. And giving each other stones with faith and hope and all that kind of stuff written on it. Deeply spiritual stuff, that you could buy at a conference. Bumper stickers and if God is sitting in the co-pilot and all that stuff. We were deeply, and I started getting asked to speak on the Sunday mornings. And that again, Sunday is rich for me. And I love this. This thing, I get asked to speak at these conferences, and within a couple of years of doing that, I started being asked to speak on the Sunday morning because, that profound spiritual experience I had in July in 1987 mattered to people, the listeners. It mattered to the listeners. And so I'm having this sort of God experience. It's at 11, 12 years sober, 13 years sober. Now, if you know my story, you know what happened. At 14 years sober, I was a Sunday morning speaker at a conference, and there was a main banquet speaker, and he and I were outside smoking cigarettes, shooting the breeze. And he was like smoking 5 cigarettes at a time, talking about fitness, and I was probably doing the same. The only difference was he was actually really fit. This guy was ripped, man, and smoking was his killer. He was tall, James Coburn-looking dude, white hair, white beard. I'm starting to look I started to look like all these old guys I'm describing. I better change it up a tad. But he's got this big barrel chest, and he's listening to me talk about what a great AA guy I am. I'm going on and on and on about what a great AA guy I am. And he looked straight at me. I swear to God, I talked for 30 minutes straight about myself, about what a great AA guy I am. And he said, son, you're asleep dreaming you're awake. And I said, pardon? He said, you're asleep dreaming you're awake. And I was deeply insulted. I just told him what a great AA guy I am. He said, no, there's an experience in AA I can tell you haven't even had. What are you talking about? I've done everything in AA. I've done every service position. I've ran my group. I'm a Sunday morning speaker. I've arrived, dude. I've got it. No, he said, you missed something. And I said, I don't know what you're talking about. He said, have you ever taken the steps? I said, pardon? Have you ever taken the steps? Oh, come on. Of course. I'm 14 years sober. Of course I've taken the steps. What are you talking about? He said, no, I didn't say read them or belong to a group that reads them or studied them or workshopped them. He said, have you ever taken the steps? Here are the steps we took, he said. I was like, I don't know what you're asking me. He said, come on up to my room. I followed him up to the room and I walked through the door. And before the door had even shut, he asked me 2 questions. He said, can you stop drinking when you start? And I said, no, I can't. And he said, can you stop drinking when you promised everybody in your life you loved that you're going to stop? He says, can you stop starting? Have you ever sworn off and started again and sworn off and started again? Yeah. He said, you're an alcoholic. That's powerlessness. That's what we mean by powerlessness. No one had ever qualified me as an alcoholic in Alcoholics Anonymous before. For 14 years, I went to meetings every single day, and I sat right beside you because you said you were alcoholic. I said I was alcoholic. It wasn't because I was copying you. I just thought we were the same. Why? Because we ended up in Alcoholics Anonymous. Who the hell ends up in Alcoholics Anonymous if you're not alcoholic? Well, I found out, probably about 3/4 of our fellowship. But I'm sitting there saying I'm alcoholic because you're saying you're alcoholic. I'm sitting there and this guy says to me, then he says, well, tell me a little bit about this God. And this is really what I want to talk about today. He says, tell me a little bit about this God. And I started talking to him about my experience as a kid. And I said, I don't believe in God. Like, I don't believe that. And I said, more so probably it's this thing about God not believing in me. If there is a God, he's an undone shit for me. And he said to me, do you now believe? He said, are you willing to believe? And I said, oh, I'm willing. I'm willing to believe. And he said, then your proposition is in the second step is God is everything or else he's nothing. What's your choice? I said, well, give me some time. No, what's your choice? Make that choice now. God's everything or else he's nothing. It only happens now. I said, well, he's got to be everything. He says, okay, would you just sit down and talk to me for a minute about something? And we sat down and we started talking about selfishness and self-centeredness. I'm 15 minutes in the room. And I'm talking to him about selfishness and self-centeredness. My life run on self. He's describing and giving me the framework. I'm filling in the blanks. And then he clears away the coffee table. He says, would you do a 3rd step prayer with me? I says, I would, but I don't know what that is. He says, it's in the big book. Like I said, never really opened that thing much. I don't even know if I own one. 14 years sober. He says, get on your knees with me. And so I got on my knees with this big man and he put his great big arms over top of me and we said the 3rd step prayer together and my life changed that moment. It changed that moment. I allowed this God of everything to enter my heart. He suggested that if I relieve me of the bondage of self. He suggested that selfishness, self-centeredness. He congratulated me on being 14 years sober on a life based on self. Thank God you didn't do too much damage. But you're going to run out of steam here. And we don't have a time frame in the spiritual world. And I need to get you connected to this power as quick as possible. And I said, why do you care? He said, because you're out there sharing the message, that's why. And so I sat down with him, I did that 3rd step prayer, and I started to realize that I had never taken the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous at 14 years sober. I got up off my knees, my life had changed. I had a very similar feeling as I did in that jail cell that day. It was Mark Houston. I connected with him later about the 4th step, and I got right into inventory right away. For the first time at 14 years sober, I did an inventory out of the big book. I'd done all the Bryland stuff, all the stuff from the Minnesota model. I did all the stuff from Hazelden. I did the stuff online. I did all that stuff. I've got 22 4 steps in my cupboard that I show guys when I take them through the steps in the basement. I said, you guys can do all of these right after you do this one. You can do all of these because I did. But I did these ones and not this one and didn't change 1 ounce. So I get into inventory. My life begins to change. Now, what started to change was These things that had been blocking me from this power as a kid, whether it was a closed mind or whether it was obstinacy or self-righteousness or self-centeredness, I had lived a secular, sober life without God. And I began to recognize that there are significant things in the way. There are things that are blocking me from this power. And they're specifically tied to the way I live my life. I am managing my life. And that's what Mark said to me. He said, you're good. Your powerlessness, you got it. What you don't got is that you're still trying to manage your life. And you've done so for 14 years. You've got a secular approach to recovery. And this God thing is necessary for a full recovery. Now, that's why I asked if there's anybody new here. It's like, it doesn't matter who the God is or what the God is. It's just that that's a necessity, is there has to be a power. So in order to move toward that power, I start to identify through my inventory the things that are blocking me. The selfishness, self-centeredness, the resentment, the fear. Those are the things that are blocking me. And underneath them, I could be specific, like the child abuse at 8 years old and unreconciled. The fear of older people because of the result of that. The anger and the rage of my father and the hatred I had toward my father. These things are blocking me from a relationship with this power. They are a few of many. The lies, the stealing, the betrayal that I had imparted in my sobriety, it was clear to me. And it was like, came to me in just a blast. And it was all this great big mess. All this great big mess, and I got before it, and I said, what am I to do with this? What am I to do with this? You're going to ask God to remove this, is what you're going to do. I'm just acquainted with God. I mean, why would I give him such a huge task right away? Because he likes it, because he can do it. You come to him broken and busted, and watch what happens. And so I laid this stuff before God, I made a list, and I started making amends. And my amends stories, I don't have time to get into any of them, but my amends stories are probably what generated the power to drive further and further and further into this sort of relationship with this God. Now, I get to that place where I'm out banging doors and making amends. You have to understand that I have a non-12-step sobriety, and we get to the 10th step. And the 10th step says this: when there are problems, now I have a secular sobriety, very much like this one. I keep this book here for this purpose. Okay, I have when it talks about cravings and stuff like here, it says suck on a candy, go for a walk, take a bath. Those are the suggestions you're going to get out of this Living Sober book. And there's many others around sponsorship and that kind of stuff. I suggest if you don't knock a book until you read it. I've read it several times so I can knock it. And I don't really care about what anybody thinks. If the author's on here, call me. We'll chat. But the fact of the matter is that I got a free pass for 14 years. Like so many others, I got a free pass for 14 years. And now I'm in this place, it's like, holy crap. The 10th step says we've entered the world of the Spirit. And Sandy Beach says, how do you know you've entered the world of the Spirit? Because some of those promises have actually come true. They're the road signs. They're the markers. It's just we continue, like, with this thought, thinking about this, those promises. We've now entered the world of the Spirit. And this is what my life looks like today. When these crop up, what crops up? Fear, resentment, dishonesty. When these crop up, selfish, what do? I ask God and wants to remove it. I bring God into the game right away. My life previous to that was figure it out. Hit a heavy bag. Go for a workout. Go for a long walk on the beach. Go for a vacation. Take more self-care. Self-care. More self-care. That's what it was. That's what in my secular Alcoholics Anonymous life, that's what we did. Go to more meetings. Double up on the meetings. That was the direction. So that's what it was. That's what it looked like. But that's not what this book says. This book says, when these crop up, what do? I ask God and wants to remove it. So this God, who I'm developing a relationship with, I suppose, I'm going to go back to him and say, man, I can't do this. You need to take this. Then what does it say? We discuss it with somebody at once. And then it says, if we've harmed anybody in the process, we make amends. And then it says, we resolutely turn our thoughts to someone we can help. Our thoughts. And if you got actions, if you're right there, do it anyway. You do it, you just do it. That's our 10th step for living. That's what keeps us in the now. This is probably the most spiritual concept that I have ever been introduced to so far in my life. And I'll tell you why. Because it works every single time. Every time. Who knew that Sandy Beach sharing all that pain and tragedy in his life about his daughter being murdered on the grass and all? Who knew that this is the way of life that I'd be exposed to in such a way through you guys sharing your experience? Who knew that my daughter was going to put a rope around her neck in the basement of her apartment and hang herself. Who knew? I got a call on my way to my home group on a Thursday night with that news. Happy, joyous, free, going down to my Alcoholics Anonymous meeting, I get a call. Sarah's hung herself. She hung herself. And now there was more to that. Johnny kicked in the window and he got her down. She's in the ICU. Now I lose it. I go to default. So I said, smash in the window, smash in the mirror out the window. And I grab my steering wheel. I have who I am. That's who I am. I'm a manager. And I go to default. And all of a sudden, the 10-step crops into my head. Have we learned nothing? When these crop up, what do? We ask God to take. God, you need to take this, man. You need to take this. I am not okay. I was on my way to a meeting to carry a message. I go down the hill the rest of the way. It was only a quarter mile to my meeting, and Brian, my workshop partner, standing up in the parking lot. I fall into his arms, and I tell him what's going on. And he says, what do you want to do? And the drug buggy just pulled up, and all these freaking alcoholics poured out of it. They detox wagon, and some of them are still drunk. And I said, let's do the meeting. Let's do the meeting. 45 minutes I sat on my hands. I could hardly say a word. I couldn't think of anything else. I couldn't think of anything. And then as soon as the meeting ended, he said, let's go. We went down to the ICU. I walk into the hospital, and my wife is standing there, and she's crying. I put my arms around her, and I said, hey, it's going to be okay. It's because I knew it was. I went to the desk, and I told the doctors and the nurses to thank them from the bottom of my heart for all that they were doing for my daughter. Can I see her? And I went in the room, and she had all the wires jacked up to her, and she was in bad shape, and she wasn't going to make it, they told me. And I put my hand underneath her neck, and I lifted her head up, and I kissed her on the lips, and I said, I love you, Sarah. I love you. It's going to be okay. And it's because I knew it was going to be okay. I knew it. And I walked back out. People dropped by, AA members were coming by and all that kind of stuff over the next couple of days. And slowly but surely she began to come out of it. And she's never recovered from that incident. She's not right. She's still in the streets. She's still doing the things she was doing then. But the bottom line is I knew it was going to be okay. I want you to hear this. Under good times, bad times, I don't tolerate a whole lot of little things. I just don't. And that was probably about 6 years ago. Just before COVID, I get a call from my oldest daughter, Dana, and she's got this husband. Now, I'm practicing this way of life. I'm living this way. I'm going through, I'm doing workshops and sharing with other alcoholics. It's the message I carry to the guys I sponsor. We got tons of 10-step buddies. When this stuff crops up, we're not going to let it eat us. They're not going to eat our lunch. And so I'm living this way. I get a call from my oldest daughter. She had rolled a ATV and she banged her head around the roll bars a little bit and she was concussed. And when she went in to get it looked at, they said there's something in her brain. And there was a tumor in her brain the size of a plum, an inoperable tumor. And they said the prognosis was not good. And she was sobbing. And her husband, who's a great guy, he didn't know how to sort of be there. And she said, I need you. And I dropped the phone at work. I'm at my desk at work. I dropped the phone at work and I could feel the rage coming up inside of me. The vanity, the pride, like, after all I do for you. And I'm talking to this God, this Bush League pinch hitter God that every once in a while I've gone back to calling him in. And I thought, oh my God, again. Have we learned nothing? I go into the adjacent room. Now this is minutes now. This isn't an hour. This is minutes. I go into the adjacent room. I drop to my knees. I ask God to take this away from me because she's in the parking lot in a couple minutes and I got to be of use to her. Take this away from me. As I was walking out the door, I turned to my colleague and I said, my daughter just did some horrible, horrible news and I'm not dealing with it very well. I'll be back in a minute. I went down the stairs and when my daughter came around the corner, she fell into my arms and I told her it's going to be okay because I knew it was. And since that time, she would argue whether it's been okay or not, but she's still alive. She wasn't supposed to be here for 3 months. We're in 3 years. We got through the COVID stuff. There's been a ton of surgeries. It's been terrible. You Alcoholics Anonymous members have been amazing. The disease that she's suffering from is freaking terrible. And I got to tell you, as a family, we're bound together. We're loving on each other. We're doing the best we can. And she's still here. Her little girls, she's got 2 tiny little girls that we're involved with. And Dana, she's still here. She's still got a chance. She's still got a chance. She gets a lot of bad news all the time, and she subscribes to the bad news. And I'm over here, an AA member, happy, joyous, and free under all conditions. But la, 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 la. It drives her freaking crazy. And sometimes I got to remember that stuff. Sometimes I got to remember that other people don't see things quite the way we do. she's in a lot of pain, and she's grinding this out in her chest and her heart, and I'm singing Kumbaya. And I don't mean to be a flake or anything like that, but I got to tell you, shit doesn't bother me anymore. Let me rephrase that. Stuff happens, and I can be 3 minutes from getting back on the beam, 3 seconds, 30 minutes, 3 days, but I just got to get back on the beam. And there is no time in the spiritual world. When Sandy, or when Earl Hightower does that, or Sandy always talks about the now. It's Sunday morning at 11:49 a.m. It's now. It's now. And right now, I could ask you, what's wrong with your life right now? Any of you's on here that got stuff going on. What's wrong with your life right now at 11:49? Well, it's 11:49. Right now. You'd have to say, well, nothing. And then very quickly, the ego jams in behind and starts saying, oh, no. You got debt. You got stuff, bills to pay. You got your relationship soured. You got that shit to do at work tomorrow. That's the ego jumps in there to spoil the now, to take away the now, to make the now painful and non-existent, basically. But the moment you get back into the now, you're right back to center, right back to the beam. And it doesn't matter the circumstances. I'm here to report that I have 4 daughters, and God has a sense of humor too. 2 of the bravest, strongest women I know are my oldest daughter, Dana, and my middle daughter, Sarah. Watching them go through the torment and the stuff they go through on a daily basis and not have this power. They're like the John Waynes of suffering. You know what I mean? Like, I love them dearly, but it's like, holy crap. Like, and neither of them, Sarah maybe a little bit, neither of them will lean towards this power. Neither of them will lean towards that. So I become awake here. And through this 12-step process, and primarily the 10th step, which is the thing I love the most, I think it's the grooviest way that I've ever heard of existing ever. I'm led to this thing about seeking. I'm led to this idea, like, I want more of that. You know, this power has brought me so much, I want more of that. I read and I talk to people, and religiosity has never entered back into the equation. But I have this strong, powerful, devout relationship with God. And I'm going to tell you something, and I do tell people this, is that there's a 12th step in this program, having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps. We try to carry this message to other alcoholics. I am never, ever closer to the God of my understanding than I am when I'm with you. Never. I got all kinds of stuff going on in my life. I love AA, and I'm deeply involved in AA, but I fish and I play sports, and all our AA guys are playing hockey tonight. Like, I got 4 grandkids. I mean, I'm a going concern. And God is at the cusp of all of it. You know, AA is at the cusp of all of it. I don't have a relationship with God without you. I am never closer to God than when I am with you. Never. And so that's how my relationship with this God that I was talking about earlier has kind of grown and expanded. And it's been of no sort of direction of mine. I didn't have to find a book. I didn't have to find a church. I didn't have to find a bunch of people. I came here to Alcoholics Anonymous. I followed the instructions that we have as members of AA for a program of Alcoholics Anonymous. Step 1, Step 2, Step 3, Step 4, Step 5, Step 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. I followed those steps, and this relationship with God became tangible. I don't talk. The part of July 16th, 87 in the jail cell that day when I heard the voice is still a part of my talk. But that is not the spiritual experience that I can transmit. You should see some of the faces when I used to talk about that at conferences. I talked about that like it mattered. Like it mattered. And I know how powerful it was in my life that God exposed and showed himself to me. But my relationship with God has only grown through my connection and community with Alcoholics Anonymous members. Isn't that interesting? And that's the message I can transmit. Having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps, we try to carry this message to alcoholics. Not my barn-burning spiritual experience in July 16, 1987. The message of the 12 steps. And almost every single guy that spends any effort or time in the 12 steps, like Mark did with me, and it was Mark and I were probably in that room for 45 minutes, and my life changed forever. And transmitting that message from one alcoholic to another has lit up an environment here in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada that's been amazing to be a part of. Many of you know our members from different sites through COVID and stuff. I didn't think Zoom and all that was going to work. I thought AA was doomed because I'm a genius, and then I've met hundreds and thousands of people that I just absolutely adore. I've got so many new friends and everything like that. And Alcoholics Anonymous is more alive in me now than it ever's been. And to be invited to sit here on a Sunday morning and share that with some of my new friends here in Miami is an absolute blessing. And I want to thank you. I want to thank you for having me. I know that I try. Anytime I try to direct a talk, I don't do very well. I'm not sure where this landed, but I'm going to tell you something. I wanted to talk of God today. I wanted to talk of the power today. That's what I wanted to talk about. And I wanted to be represented, like I said when I first started talking, what I want really repped was my love for AA. My priorities in life go like this. And you women, don't get mad at me or anything like that, because you always do. But it's AA, and then God, and then the San Jose Sharks, and then fishing, muskie fishing, and then my family, and then my work, because down there about item 17, that's my priorities in life. And if I keep them in that way, Alcoholics Anonymous first, and then God, I seem to have this amazing sort of culture. It's not a life, it's a culture, it's a way of being. It's just a way of being. And just recently, and I'll say this and I'll shut up, having had this experience on this Monday night backroom meeting with you, Russell actually came to speak there, and Terry's been there, and it was an absolute joy to be a part of it. We've been exposed, Brian, myself, and Ken, we've been exposed to some of the grandest messages that I've ever heard on a regular basis. We began to count on it. And over time, it has opened my mind and my spirit to a larger, greater, more expansive relationship with this power that eliminates me from it altogether. I used to think it was my life. I was reminded that I turned my life and my will over to the care of God. Set free. It's not even my life anymore. Now, put your head around that shit. I'm 35 years sober, and I'm more in love with AA and what's to come than I've ever been. It's bizarre. It's bizarre. And I'm really, really happy to be here. Thanks so much, guys, for having me. And I look forward to sharing more with you and talking more and meeting more. Thank you.